And ahead of that lockdown, it's estimated that more than 300,000 travellers will be affected because they used the land checkpoints between Singapore and Malaysia daily. And the impending lockdown has also sparked uncertainty whether exemptions will be granted and to what extent. Gwyneth Teo joins us live now from Woodlands Checkpoint in Singapore. It's one of two land border crossings between the countries. Gwyneth, describe to us the situation at the checkpoint. You know, I hear there's not just anxiety for those who work in Singapore.
That's right. It's been a very busy day here at Woodlands Checkpoint, considering that it's a weekday. It's been lots of people going back and forth the border the whole day, and that's because a lot of Malaysians who work in Singapore came into work this morning and their bosses told them, turn back, go back home, pack up your things and be prepared to stay for the next 2 weeks at least. So that's what a lot of them did from about 10 to 11 o'clock. There were a lot of Malaysians who were doing the backflow back into Malaysia, packing up their things. And that created a little bit of a traffic situation here in Singapore. We were seeing reports on motoring, Telegram chats and Grab drivers as well telling us that there was a bad traffic situation, a traffic jam at the traffic crossing right before the causeway, right before the checkpoint, sorry, up until about 3 p.m. And of course, one of the things that's complicating all this is that the cross-border buses will have to stop at midnight tonight. The last few buses will run tonight and then they will have to turn back before midnight and come back, otherwise they'll be stuck. And that's really, what I'm really describing here is that there's so much disruption to everyday lives. As you've mentioned, 300,000 people make this border crossing every single day. And it's not just the people who are working in Singapore. I spoke to a father and he said, he lives in Malaysia, his family lives in Malaysia, but his children go to school in Singapore. And now it's the March school holiday break. He brought his children back home to Malaysia for the break. But now because of the lockdown, he had to rush his children back over the border into Singapore and make sure that they can make it to school next week. And there's also people, who are serving the national service, even though they're Singaporeans who live in Malaysia. There's also people who told me that they didn't want to leave their motorcycles in Singapore for the next 14, because after 14 days they would have to pay a fine, for example. And what I'm really describing here is that Malaysians and Singaporeans alike, all these people, their lives straddle across the border. And now this lockdown is forcing them to choose which side of the border they want to be on or have to be on for the next 2 weeks and perhaps for the foreseeable future. And unfortunately, that's really caused, it's really been quite an upsetting situation for some people, partly because there's very little clarity on exactly what this lockdown means for them.
在下我20年生活了，第一次。
是第一次怎么讲呢？
要跟家人分离咯，为了生活。
你会觉得怎样呢？
现在生活很辛苦，不赚钱哪里有钱吃饭
？Whether the government of Malaysia allow the PR to continue to come here to work, I'm not sure. They say it's banned, right? I don't know what does that mean.
So there's plenty of disruption as you've described it there. Gwyneth, more questions than answers, it seems, at this point. There's also lots of uncertainty. So how are people coping? What have they been telling you?
So the good thing is that for those who work in Singapore, companies have been quite accommodating. Some have made arrangements for those workers who want to stay in Singapore to, they've booked hotels or hostels where they can stay for the next 2 weeks. Some have also offered their employees flexible work arrangements to go back to Malaysia and work from home. And actually that's something that we saw quite a lot, especially after 6 p.m. A lot of people crossing back into Malaysia after 6 p.m. they were carrying laptop bags, and some of them earlier in the day also had told us that they had been asked by their bosses to come back to Singapore, pick up an iPad device, for example, a company-issued device, and go back to Malaysia and continue working from home. So all those arrangements are there for them. Largely, there's been a sense of calm, maybe a sense of urgency, definitely, but also this sense of uncertainty, remains about how long this is all going to take place. Even though the official word from the government, the Malaysian government, is that this will last till the end of March. One worker who works in F&B in Singapore and food and beverage industry, he told me that his boss told him to be prepared to stay in Singapore for 3 to 6 months. That's way longer than the end of March. And of course, I've also been asking people, so how long have you been prepared for? How many weeks worth of clothing do you have in your luggage? And they say, well, I've packed 2 weeks worth of clothing, but This could be for 2 months, this could be for 2 days. We really don't know.
Certainly a very uncertain time. Gwyneth, thank you very much for that update. Gwyneth Cho there, live for us in Singapore.